They called him the Iceman of Wall Street, Alexander Blackwood, a man who could fire 1,000 employees without blinking, but couldn't figure out why his own grandmother, the matriarch of the Blackwood Empire, had stopped smiling years ago. He thought he could buy her happiness with Michelin star dinners and diamond brooches. He was wrong. It took a broke, exhausted waitress named Sarah, risking her job at the most exclusive restaurant in Manhattan, to break the silence. She didn't use words. She used her hands, and what she revealed in that silent conversation would topple a corporate conspiracy and change Alexander's life forever. You think you know where this is going? You have no idea. The kitchen of l'Orangerie on East 65th Street was less of a culinary workspace and more of a war zone. The air was thick with the scent of truffle oil, searing wagyu, and the palpable fear of the staff. At the center of the chaos was Henri, a head chef whose temper was as legendary as his soufflés. "Table 4 is waiting," Henri screamed, slamming a silver serving tray onto the pass. "If the water glass drops below half full, you are fired. Do you understand? Fired!" Sarah Jenkins wiped a bead of sweat from her forehead and nodded, tucking a stray lock of brown hair behind her ear. "Yes, chef." Sarah was invisible. That was her superpower. At 24, she was drowning in student loans from a nursing degree she couldn't afford to finish and medical bills for her younger brother, Toby. L'Orangerie was her lifeline. The tips here could cover Toby's hearing aids, provided she didn't get fired. And tonight, getting fired was a statistical probability. The entire restaurant had been cleared for a single reservation. Alexander Blackwood, CEO of Blackwood & Co., a private equity firm that owned half the city. He was 32, handsome in a way that felt predatory, and currently sitting at the center table with the demeanor of a judge about to pass a death sentence. Opposite him sat an elderly woman in a wheelchair. Martha Blackwood. She was dressed in vintage Chanel, a silk scarf tied around her neck, her white hair perfectly coiffed. But her eyes, pale blue and watery, stared blankly at the untouched crystal goblet in front of her. Sarah smoothed her apron and approached the table, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had been warned, don't speak unless spoken to. Don't make eye contact, pour from the right. "Grandmother, please," Alexander said, his voice low and laced with frustration. He cut a piece of the Dover sole. "It's your favorite. Henry made it specifically for you." Martha didn't move. She didn't even blink. She just stared at the chaotic, abstract painting on the far wall. Alexander dropped his fork. The clatter echoed in the silent dining room. The maître d', a nervous man named Charles, winced in the corner. "She's doing it again," Alexander muttered, running a hand through his dark hair. He looked at Charles. "Is the music too loud? Is the light too bright? Why won't she eat?" I can adjust the dimmer, Mr. Blackwood," Charles stammered. "Just fix it," Alexander snapped. Sarah stepped forward to refill the water, her hand trembling slightly. As she poured, she noticed something. Martha wasn't staring at the painting. She was staring at the reflection of the kitchen doors in the glass frame of the painting. She was watching the chefs shout. She was watching the movement. Martha's hand twitched on the tablecloth. Her index finger tapped her thumb twice, then curled. It was a small movement. To Alexander, it was a tremor of old age. To Charles, it was nothing. But Sarah froze. The water pitcher hovered in mid-air. Hungry. Martha had just signed the word hungry in American Sign Language, ASL. It was sloppy, stiff from arthritis, but it was there. Sarah looked at Alexander. He was busy checking his phone, likely buying another company. He hadn't seen it. He didn't know. Sarah looked back at Martha. The old woman's eyes shifted, locking on to Sarah's. For a split second, The fog lifted. Martha tapped her chin with an open hand. "Thank you." She was thanking Sarah for noticing. Sarah's breath hitched. She knew the rules. Invisible. If she engaged, Henry would fire her before she reached the parking lot. But she also thought of Toby, sitting at home in silence, and how his face lit up when she signed to him. Sarah made a choice. She set the pitcher down. Instead of retreating, she took a small step closer to the wheelchair. She didn't speak. She raised her hands. "Do you want different food?" Sarah signed, her movements fluid and practiced. The reaction was instantaneous. Martha's spine straightened. Her mouth opened in a silent gasp. Alexander looked up from his phone, his brow furrowed. "What are you doing?" Alexander demanded, his voice slicing through the air. "Why are you waving at her?" Sarah didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on Martha. Martha's shaky hands rose. "Two. Fancy." She pointed at the Dover sole. "Hate. Fish." Sarah couldn't help it. A small smile tugged at her lips. She signed back. "What do you want?" Martha's eyes twinkled. She signed 2 words. "Cheeseburger." "Fries." "Waitress." Alexander stood up, his chair scraping the floor. "I asked you a question. What are you doing to my grandmother?" Charles and Henri were rushing over, panic written on their faces. "Mr. Blackwood, I am so sorry," Henri began, glaring at Sarah. "Sarah, get back to the kitchen immediately. You are finished." "She wants a cheeseburger," Sarah said softly, finally looking at Alexander. Alexander stared at her, stunned. "Excuse me?" "She hates the fish," Sarah explained, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. "She told me she wants a cheeseburger and fries, and she wants you to put your phone away." Alexander looked from Sarah to his grandmother. "She told you?" "She hasn't spoken a coherent sentence in 6 months. The doctors say it's vascular dementia." "It's not dementia," Sarah said, risking everything. "She's deaf, sir. Or at least her hearing has deteriorated to the point where she's isolated. She's not ignoring you. She just can't hear you." Alexander looked down at Martha. "Grandma." Martha looked at Alexander. She raised her hand and made a C shape, moving it across her chest. "Boss." Then she pointed at Alexander and rolled her eyes. Alexander didn't understand the sign, but he understood the eye roll. It was the same look she used to give him when he was a teenager, coming home past curfew. "She says you're being bossy," Sarah translated, suppressing a laugh. Alexander Blackwood, the man who terrified Wall Street, slowly sat back down. He looked at the untouched $80 fish. Then he looked at Henry. "Chef," Alexander said, his voice dangerously calm. "Get my grandmother a cheeseburger and fries, heavy on the salt." "But, sir, we don't serve," Henri started. "Make it happen." As the kitchen scrambled into a frenzy to make a high-end burger, Alexander turned his dark, intense gaze onto Sarah. He didn't look at her like a waitress anymore. He looked at her like a puzzle he needed to solve. "What is your name?" "Sarah. Sarah Jenkins." "Well, Sarah Jenkins," Alexander said, leaning back. "You just accomplished in 2 minutes what 5 neurologists couldn't do in 2 years. Pull up a chair." "Sir, I can't. I have to work." "I'm buying the restaurant's time for the night," Alexander said, waving a hand dismissively. "Sit down. We have a lot to discuss." The next hour was a blur. Sarah sat at the table, translating between the billionaire and the matriarch. It turned out Martha hadn't lost her mind. She had lost her hearing aid during a hospital stay months ago, and due to a mix of pride and the staff's negligence, she hadn't been able to communicate it. She had retreated into silence because it was easier than screaming to be heard. Martha was sharp, witty, and critical. She roasted Alexander's tie. It looks like a bruised eggplant, and critiqued his recent acquisition of a tech startup. Overvalued, Alex. You're losing your touch. For the first time in years, Alexander laughed. It was a rusty, unfamiliar sound, but it was genuine. When the dinner ended, Alexander walked Sarah to the exit. The staff watched in stunned silence. Henry looked like he was about to have a stroke. "I have a proposition for you, Sarah," Alexander said as they stood under the awning. The New York rain was drizzling down, blurring the city lights. "I already have a job, Mr. Blackwood," Sarah said, clutching her purse. "A job where you're undervalued and underpaid," Alexander countered. He pulled a sleek black business card from his pocket. "I need a private caretaker for Martha, someone who speaks her language. Literally. She trusts you." "I haven't seen that light in her eyes since my grandfather died." Sarah hesitated. "I'm not a certified caretaker. I was a nursing student, but I dropped out. I don't care about certificates. I care about results. I'll pay you $10,000 a month, plus room and board at the Blackwood estate." Sarah nearly choked. $10,000? That would clear Toby's medical debts in 3 months. It would change everything. "Why?" she asked. "You could hire the best specialists in the world." "I did." Alexander's face hardened. "They treated her like a patient. You treated her like a person." He stepped closer, his cologne, sandalwood and rain, filling her senses. "But there's a catch." "Of course there is." "My family," Alexander said, his jaw tightening. "My aunt, Victoria, and my cousin, Pierce. They have different ideas about Martha's care. They believe she belongs in a facility they control." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. "Why?" "Because Martha still controls the voting shares of Blackwood & Co., Alexander revealed. If she is declared mentally incompetent, Victoria gets power of attorney. And if Victoria gets power, she sells the company off for parts. I need you to prove Martha is lucid. I need you to be her voice." Sarah looked into his eyes. She saw desperation masked by arrogance. She saw a grandson terrified of losing the only person who actually loved him. "I'll do it," Sarah said. Alexander nodded. "Good. Pack your bags. The driver will pick you up at 8 a.m. tomorrow. And Sarah?" "Yes?" "Be careful. The Blackwood estate is beautiful, but it's full of sharks, and they smell blood." The next morning, a black limousine, longer than Sarah's apartment building, idled outside her crumbling walk-up in Queens. The neighbors were hanging out of their windows, staring. Sarah hugged Toby goodbye. "Mrs. Higgins will check on you, okay? I'll video call you every night." Toby signed. "Be brave, big sister." She would need to be. The drive to the Blackwood estate in the Hamptons took 2 hours. When the iron gates swung open, Sarah gasped. It wasn't a house, it was a fortress of limestone and glass, perched on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. As Sarah stepped out of the car, she was greeted not by Alexander, but by a woman who looked like she had been carved out of ice. She wore a white pantsuit that cost more than Sarah's life earnings. "So," the woman said, looking Sarah up and down with undisguised disgust, "you're the miracle worker Alex found in a kitchen." "I'm Sarah." "I'm Victoria Blackwood," the woman replied, "Alexander's aunt. And let me be clear, Miss Jenkins. I know what you are. You're a gold digger who learned a few hand signs to trick a senile old woman." Victoria leaned in, her voice dropping to a hiss. "Enjoy your stay. It won't be long. I have eyes everywhere in this house. Make one mistake, one slip-up, and I will destroy you." Sarah gripped the handle of her suitcase. She wanted to run. She wanted to tell the driver to take her back to Queens. But then she looked up at the second-floor window. Martha was there. She was watching. Martha raised a hand and signed, Welcome. Sarah squared her shoulders. She looked Victoria dead in the eye. I'm not going anywhere, Sarah said. Victoria smiled, a thin, cruel expression. We'll see about that. As Sarah walked past her into the cavernous foyer, she didn't realize that the game had already begun. And in the shadows of the grand staircase, a man was watching her. Pierce, Alexander's cousin. He was holding a phone to his ear. She's here, Pierce whispered. Initiate the protocol. We need to find dirt on Sarah Jenkins. If she doesn't have any skeletons in her closet, we'll plant some. The first week at the Blackwood estate was a lesson in psychological warfare. While the ocean views were breathtaking and the linen sheets had a thread count higher than Sarah's student debt, the atmosphere was suffocating. Sarah's routine was strictly monitored. Every morning at 7 a.m. she would enter Martha's suite. The room, once a mausoleum of silence, was now filled with life. Sarah had opened the heavy velvet drapes, letting the sunlight flood in. She had replaced the classical music, which Martha couldn't hear, with a large flat-screen TV playing closed-captioned news and old movies. The transformation in Martha was miraculous. She wasn't senile. She was bored and furious. They treat me like a potted plant, Martha signed one Tuesday morning, aggressively stabbing at her grapefruit with a spoon. Useless. Decoration. You're not useless, Sarah signed back, sitting across from her. You're the owner. Remind them. Hard to remind people when they stop looking at you, Martha replied, her expression wistful. Alexander is a good boy. But he is blind. He sees numbers, not people. And Victoria, she sees a checkbook. Sarah had learned to navigate the house carefully. Victoria Blackwood was a prowling tiger. She would often stand in doorways, watching Sarah with cold, calculating eyes, looking for any slip-up. One evening, Alexander returned home late. He looked exhausted, his tie loosened, the weight of a hostile takeover evident in the slump of his shoulders. He found Sarah in the library, reading a book on corporate law she had pulled from the shelf. Light reading? Alexander asked, pouring himself a scotch. Sarah jumped, closing the book. I was just trying to understand what fiduciary duty means. Martha keeps signing it when she watches the business news. Alexander chuckled, walking over to the fireplace. My grandmother was the sharpest, ruthless shark in Manhattan in the 80s. It doesn't surprise me she still tracks the market. He looked at Sarah, really looked at her. You look tired, Sarah. Is my aunt giving you hell? She's particular, Sarah said diplomatically. She's a viper, Alexander corrected. He took a sip of his drink. Thank you for what you're doing. Martha smiled today when I went in to say good night. She actually squeezed my hand. She loves you, Alexander. She worries you're working yourself to death. Alexander's eyes softened. He took a step closer to Sarah. The air in the room shifted, becoming charged with an unspoken tension. He wasn't the billionaire CEO in that moment. He was just a lonely man finding comfort in the only person who seemed to tell him the truth. And you? Alexander asked, his voice low. Do you worry about me? Before Sarah could answer, the library doors swung open. Pierce, Alexander's cousin, strolled in, wearing a smirk that didn't reach his dead eyes. Interrupting a cozy moment, Pierce drawled. Aunt Victoria is looking for the help. Apparently, Martha spilled tea on the Persian rug. The moment shattered. Sarah stiffened, reverting to employee mode. I'll go handle it. As she brushed past Pierce, he leaned in and whispered, I know about your brother's surgery next month, Sarah. Expensive procedure? Be a shame if you lost your income right before it. Sarah froze, then kept walking. They were digging into her life. The clock was ticking. The climax of the week was the annual Blackwood Charity Gala. It was to be held in the grand ballroom of the estate. The guest list included senators, tech moguls, and the board members of Blackwood & Co. Victoria had given strict instructions. Sarah was to stay upstairs. "We don't need the staff mingling with the elite," she had sneered. But an hour before the party, Alexander knocked on Sarah's door. He was holding a garment bag. "Put this on," he said. "Mr. Blackwood, your aunt said—" "I don't care what my aunt said. Martha refuses to go downstairs unless you are there to translate. She wants to talk to the board. Tonight." When Sarah unzipped the bag, she gasped. It was a midnight blue gown, modest but elegant, made of silk that felt like water. When she descended the grand staircase 40 minutes later, the chatter in the ballroom died down. She wasn't wearing diamonds, and her hair was in a simple bun, but she radiated a quiet dignity that outshone the socialites. Alexander, waiting at the bottom of the stairs, looked like he had been struck by lightning. "You look." Alexander cleared his throat, regaining his composure. "Martha is waiting." The night was a battlefield. Martha, dressed in regal purple, held court in the center of the room. Sarah stood by her side, a conduit for the matriarch's sharp wit. When Mr. Henderson, the chairman of the board, approached with a condescending smile, saying, "Martha, dear, you look rested," Sarah didn't miss a beat. She watched Martha's fast, aggressive signs. "Mrs. Blackwood says," Sarah translated, her voice clear and projecting, "that she is not rested. She is vigilant. And she asks why the R&D budget for the renewable energy sector was slashed by 15% without her authorization." Henderson's smile faltered. The room went silent. Well, it was a necessary austerity measure." Martha signed again. "Liar. Check the shell companies." "She says," Sarah continued, her heart pounding, "that austerity shouldn't apply only to innovation, while executive bonuses remain untouched. She suggests you look into the shell companies." Victoria, standing near the bar, dropped her champagne flute. It shattered. Alexander stepped forward, his eyes narrowing at Henderson. "What shell companies is she talking about, Bob?" "This is ridiculous," Victoria shrieked, rushing over. "She's senile. And this girl," she pointed a shaking finger at Sarah, "is making it up. She doesn't know sign language. She's manipulating you all." "I'm certified in ASL," Sarah lied smoothly. She wasn't certified, but she was fluent. "And if you'd like, Mrs. Blackwood can spell it out for you. CAYMAN. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Alexander looked at his grandmother, then at Sarah, and finally at his aunt. He saw the panic in Victoria's eyes. "Meeting in my office," Alexander announced to the board, his voice icy. "Now. Sarah, bring Martha." As the group moved toward the study, Pierce bumped into Sarah, hard. He slipped something into her pocket, a small metallic drive, but he did it with the grace of a pickpocket. Sarah didn't feel a thing. "You'll regret this," Pierce whispered. "You just declared war." Inside the office, the truth began to spill. With Sarah translating, Martha revealed that she had been reviewing the financial reports brought to her room by a sympathetic maid whom Victoria had fired months ago. She had noticed discrepancies, money siphoned off into accounts linked to VB Holdings, Victoria Blackwood Holdings. Alexander looked at the documents on his computer, cross-referencing Martha's claims. His face went pale. "You're stealing from us," he said to Victoria. "You've been embezzling millions." "I was protecting the family legacy from your reckless risks," Victoria shouted. "Get out," Alexander said. "You're off the board. You and Pierce. Get out of my house." Victoria straightened her jacket. She looked at Sarah with pure venom. This isn't over. You think you've won, little waitress? You have no idea how this world works." As Victoria and Pierce stormed out, Alexander slumped into his chair. He looked at Sarah. "You saved the company. You saved everything." He stood up and walked over to her. The adrenaline of the confrontation was fading, replaced by something warmer. He reached out, his hand brushing her cheek. "Sarah," he whispered. He leaned in. Sarah's breath hitched. She wanted this. She had wanted this since the moment he defended her in the restaurant. But just as their lips were about to touch, the door burst open. It wasn't Victoria, it was 2 police officers, followed by a smug-looking Pierce. "That's her," Pierce said, pointing at Sarah. "Search her." "What is the meaning of this?" Alexander demanded, stepping in front of Sarah. "Officer, this is my private residence." "We received a tip about corporate espionage and grand larceny," the older officer said. "Mr. Pierce Blackwood claims this woman stole a prototype hard drive containing trade secrets worth billions." "That's insane," Alexander scoffed. "She's been with me all night." "Check her pocket," Pierce said, leaning against the doorframe, checking his nails. "The right pocket of that dress you bought her." Alexander turned to Sarah. "Sarah, show them. Prove him wrong." Sarah reached into her pocket, expecting to find nothing. Her fingers brushed against cold metal. Her blood ran cold. Slowly, she pulled out a silver USB drive. It was stamped with the Blackwood Top Secret logo. The room spun. I don't know what this is," Sarah stammered. "I didn't put this here." "A common tactic," Pierce said loudly. "Get close to the CEO, manipulate the grandmother, and steal the tech to sell to competitors. I did some digging, Alex. Did you know her brother has a $50,000 surgery scheduled for next week? And she had no way to pay for it. Until yesterday, when a deposit of $20,000 was made into her account from a rival firm, Apex Industries." Sarah's eyes widened. "What? No! That money! I don't have that money!" Pierce tossed a bank statement onto Alexander's desk. It was a forgery, a brilliant, high-quality forgery. It showed a wire transfer to Sarah Jenkins. Alexander picked up the paper. His hands were shaking. He looked at the bank statement, then at the USB drive in the officer's hand, and finally at Sarah. The warmth was gone from his eyes. The Iceman was back. "Alexander!" Sarah pleaded, tears welling in her eyes. "Please, you know me. I didn't do this. He planted it when he bumped into me in the hall." "And the bank transfer?" Alexander asked, his voice dead. "Did he plant that too?" "Yes. I mean, I don't know how, but I trusted you," Alexander said. The hurt in his voice was worse than anger. It was the sound of a heart closing shut. "I let you into my home. I let you near my grandmother. Alexander, look at Martha." Sarah pointed to the wheelchair. Martha was frantically signing, slamming her hand on the armrest. Lies. Trap. Pierce's snake. But Alexander wasn't looking at Martha. He couldn't. He felt like a fool. The betrayal cut too deep. "Officer," Alexander turned his back on Sarah. "Escort her off the premises. If she returns, arrest her." "Alex, no!" Sarah cried as the officer grabbed her arm. "Martha needs me. They'll hurt her." "Get her out of here," Alexander roared, sweeping a stack of papers off his desk in a burst of rage. Sarah was dragged out of the study, down the grand staircase, and thrown out the front door into the cold night air. The heavy oak doors slammed shut with a finality that echoed in her bones. She stood there in the gravel, shivering in the gown Alexander had bought her, clutching her purse. She had lost the job. She had lost the money for Toby. And she had lost the man she was falling in love with. Inside the house, Pierce walked over to the wet bar and poured a drink. He toasted the empty room. Victoria stepped out from the shadows of the hallway. "Is it done?" she asked. "She's gone," Pierce smiled. "And Alex is so heartbroken he won't look at a bank statement for a month. We have time to liquidate the assets before anyone notices." "And the old woman?" Victoria asked, glancing at Martha, who was weeping silently in her chair. "Send her to the facility upstate tomorrow," Pierce said. "Dr. Harrow is expecting her. Heavily sedated. She won't be signing anything ever again." 2 weeks later, Sarah was back in Queens. The apartment felt smaller than before. The rejection letter from the nursing board sat on the counter. Another door closed. She sat on the floor, Toby's head in her lap. He was watching cartoons, oblivious to the fact that his surgery had been cancelled. Sarah felt hollow. She had tried to call Alexander a dozen times. Blocked. She had tried to go to the Blackwood building. Security escorted her away. She turned on the local news just to have some background noise. "Breaking news," the anchor announced. "Concern growing for the health of Martha Blackwood, the matriarch of the Blackwood Empire. A spokesperson for the family states that she has suffered a severe stroke and has been moved to a private hospice facility for end-of-life care." Sarah bolted upright. A stroke? No. Martha was healthy. Her heart was strong. The screen cut to a clip of Alexander leaving the hospital. He looked like a ghost. He looked broken. "It's a lie," Sarah whispered. She stood up. The despair that had been drowning her for 2 weeks suddenly evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard rage. They were killing Martha. They were going to drug her into silence and let her die so they could rob the company blind. Sarah looked at Toby. She signed, "I have to go help a friend." "It is dangerous." Toby looked at her, his eyes serious. He signed back, "The lady with the burger." Sarah smiled through her tears. "Yes, the lady with the burger." She grabbed her coat. She didn't have money. She didn't have power. But she knew something Victoria and Pierce didn't know. She knew that Martha had a secret safety deposit box key hidden inside the lining of her wheelchair. Martha had told her about it during one of their late-night talks, a fail-safe she had created 30 years ago. And inside that box was the original deed to the company, and a video will that superseded everything. Sarah wasn't going to the police. They wouldn't believe her. She was going to the one place where Alexander Blackwood couldn't ignore her. Tomorrow was the Blackwood Shareholder Summit. It was being broadcast live on national television. Sarah pulled her hair back. She put on her waitress uniform from l'Orangerie. It was her armor. "Okay, Alexander," she whispered to the empty room. "You want the truth? I'm going to serve it to you." The Grand Imperial Hotel in Midtown Manhattan was a fortress of glass and steel, currently surrounded by a fleet of news vans and black SUVs. The Blackwood & Cumdor Shareholder Summit was the financial event of the year. The stock price had been volatile since the rumors of Martha's stroke, and today was the day Victoria and Pierce planned to stabilize it by announcing their total takeover. Sarah stood by the loading dock in the alleyway, the cold wind biting through her thin waitress uniform. She adjusted the collar, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She looked like just another member of the catering staff, but inside her pocket she carried nothing but desperation and a tube of glucose gel she used to give Toby when his blood sugar dropped, a small detail that would soon become vital. She spotted the catering truck from l'Orangerie. It was fate. Henri, the volatile head chef, was screaming at a sous chef near the back lift. "You call this plating? A pigeon could plate better. Fix it." Sarah took a deep breath and stepped out of the shadows. "Chef!" Henri spun around, his face red. He narrowed his eyes. "Sarah, the girl who got fired. What are you doing here? You look like a drowned rat." "I need to get inside, Henri." Sarah said, her voice steady. "I need an apron and a tray." "Why? So you can spill water on another billionaire?" Henry scoffed. "Get lost, Sarah. Security is tight. They have a list." "Alexander Blackwood is in danger," Sarah said, stepping closer. "And so is the old woman who liked your cheeseburger." Henry paused. He was a tyrant in the kitchen, but he had an artist's soul. He remembered the night Martha had eaten his food with joy, something few customers ever did. He also remembered how Pierce Blackwood had once sent back a perfect risotto, calling it pig slop, without tasting it. "The cousin, the one with the lizard eyes. He is running the show?" Henry asked. "Yes, and he's going to destroy everything." Henry stared at her for a long moment. Then he grunted. He grabbed a spare apron from the back of the truck and tossed it at her. "Station 4, champagne rotation. If anyone asks, you are a last-minute agency replacement. Your name is Murray." Henry lit a cigarette. "Don't make me regret this." "Thank you, chef." Sarah tied the apron tight, pinned her hair back, and grabbed a silver tray. She walked past the security checkpoint, flashing a badge Henri had slipped her. The guard barely looked up. To him, she was part of the furniture, invisible. Inside, the ballroom was a sea of suits and diamonds. A massive screen behind the stage displayed a graph of the company's profits. At the podium, Victoria Blackwood stood bathed in a spotlight, looking like a benevolent queen. "And though our beloved Martha is too frail to lead, her spirit guides us," Victoria crooned into the microphone. "She has given her blessing for Pierce and me to steer the ship into a new era of aggressive acquisition." Sarah moved through the crowd, offering champagne, her eyes scanning the room. She found Alexander sitting in the front row. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. His eyes were hollow, staring at the floor. He wasn't listening to Victoria, he was mourning. And then Sarah saw her. To the right of the stage, in the shadows, sat Martha Blackwood in her wheelchair. A nurse stood behind her. Martha's head was lolled to the side, her mouth slightly open. She looked lifeless, a prop to be paraded out for sympathy. Sarah's blood boiled. They had drugged her. Sarah began to weave through the tables, moving closer to the stage. She had to time this perfectly. She had to get to that wheelchair before the security guards intercepted her. On stage, Victoria gestured to the side. "And now, to assure our shareholders of the unity of this family, we have brought Martha here today to witness the signing of the transfer documents." Pierce walked over, grabbed the handles of the wheelchair, and wheeled Martha into the center spotlight. The bright lights hit the old woman's face. She didn't react. "Grandmother," Pierce said, his voice amplified by the lapel mic. He placed a pen in her limp hand. "Just like we practiced. Sign the paper." The room went silent. Cameras zoomed in. Millions of people were watching. Martha's hand trembled, but she didn't grip the pen. It fell from her fingers and clattered onto the floor. "Oh, poor dear," Victoria sighed theatrically. "She's so weak." But she gave verbal consent earlier. "We have the witnesses." "No," a voice rang out. It wasn't Sarah. It was Alexander. He stood up from the front row. "She didn't give consent. She doesn't know where she is." "Sit down, Alexander," Pierce hissed, his smile straining. "Don't make a scene." "She's my grandmother." Alexander walked toward the stage stairs. 2 large security guards stepped in his path, blocking him. "Mr. Blackwood is distraught," Victoria said smoothly to the crowd. "Grief makes us do irrational things." Alexander struggled against the guards. "Let me through! I want to see her!" "Get him out," Pierce ordered. This was the moment. The chaos was the cover Sarah needed. While all eyes were on Alexander fighting the guards, Sarah dropped her tray. The crash of breaking glass and splashing champagne turned heads near the back, but she was already sprinting. She didn't run toward Alexander. She ran toward the stage ramp on the far left. She hit the stage running. The nurse saw her and shrieked, "Security!" Pierce spun around, his eyes widening. "You! How did you—" Sarah didn't stop. She slid across the polished floor like a baseball player, sliding into home, coming to a stop right at Martha's feet. "Martha!" Sarah screamed. She grabbed Martha's cold hands. "Martha, look at me!" Martha's eyes were glassy, unfocused, pupils dilated, heavy sedation. "Get her off stage!" Victoria screamed, abandoning her poise. "Cut the feed! Cut the camera feed!" But the camera operators were too stunned to move, and the live broadcast continued. The world watched as a waitress in a stained apron shook the billionaire matriarch. Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out the glucose gel. It was a desperate gamble. If Martha was sedated, sugar might give her a momentary spike of energy, just enough to focus. She squeezed a dab onto her finger and rubbed it on Martha's gums. "Martha," Sarah signed right in front of her face, big and aggressive. "Wake up. Danger. Alexander needs you." Pierce lunged at Sarah, grabbing her by the hair. "You miserable little—" "Get off her!" Alexander broke free from the guards, fueled by a surge of adrenaline, and vaulted onto the stage. He tackled Pierce, sending them both crashing into the podium. The microphone screeched with feedback. The ballroom erupted into chaos. Shareholders were standing, shouting. Security was swarming the stage. Sarah ignored it all. She held Martha's face. "Martha!" Sarah signed again. "Burger. Remember, the burger." Martha blinked. A spark of recognition fought through the chemical fog. Her eyes shifted. She saw Sarah. Then she saw Alexander wrestling with Pierce. Martha's hand twitched. She inhaled a ragged breath. Sarah looked at the wheelchair armrest, the right side. She remembered the secret. "The key," Sarah whispered. She began to claw at the leather seam of the armrest. "Stop her!" Victoria yelled, rushing at Sarah with her high heels clicking like gunshots. She grabbed Sarah's arm, digging her nails in. "You thief! I'll have you buried!" Sarah shoved Victoria back with a strength she didn't know she had. "You're the thief!" Sarah ripped the leather open. Foam padding flew into the air. There, taped to the metal frame inside the armrest, was a small silver key and a micro SD card. Sarah snatched them up. She held them high, turning to the cameras. "She's not senile," Sarah shouted, her voice breaking. And she didn't agree to anything. The room froze. The sight of the waitress holding the hidden items like a holy relic stopped everyone in their tracks. Even Alexander and Pierce stopped fighting, both men panting, their suits torn. "What is that?" Alexander asked, standing up and wiping blood from his lip. Sarah scrambled to her feet, moving behind the wheelchair to use it as a shield. "It's her insurance policy. Martha told me weeks ago. She knew you were stealing from her Victoria." Victoria's face went white. "Lies! She planted it!" "Check the timestamp on the SD card," Sarah yelled at the camera crew. "Someone, please, play it!" One of the tech guys, a young man who looked terrified but intrigued, ran over and took the card from Sarah's trembling hand. "Don't you dare!" Pierce shouted, lunging forward. Alexander stepped in front of Pierce. His gaze was murderous. "Play it! If you have nothing to hide, Pierce, let's see what's on it." The tech guy plugged the card into the presentation laptop. The massive screen behind them flickered. The graph of profits disappeared. A video appeared. It was grainy, filmed on a smartphone, likely by the sympathetic maid who had been fired. The angle was low, hidden on a shelf. In the video, Martha sat in her room. She looked healthier, sharper. This was filmed months ago. She held up a newspaper to date the recording. Then she began to sign. She didn't speak. She signed. Sarah stepped forward, her voice booming through the quiet room. "I will translate." On the screen, Martha signed. "My name is Martha Blackwood. I am of sound mind. I am recording this because I fear my niece, Victoria, and my nephew, Pierce, are drugging my tea." Gasps rippled through the audience. Victoria staggered back, clutching her pearls. Martha continued signing. "I have found the transfers to VB Holdings. They are stealing the company. If I am found incapacitated or dead, know that I did not sign over power." Martha leaned closer to the camera in the video. "Alexander, my grandson, I love you. You were blind, but you have a good heart. Do not let them take the legacy. And," Martha smiled in the video, "if you find this, give the girl who understands me a raise." The video ended. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. Then, a slow, rhythmic clapping started. It was Martha. Real, live Martha. The glucose and the adrenaline of the chaos had burned through enough of the sedative. She was weak, her head lulling, but her hands were moving. She was clapping. She looked at Victoria. She raised a shaky hand and signed one word: fired. Alexander let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for a lifetime. He turned to the security guards who were looking confused. "Arrest them," Alexander commanded, pointing at Victoria and Pierce. "Embezzlement, fraud, and elder abuse. The police are already on their way." "You can't do this!" Victoria screamed, as the guards, realizing who actually held the power now, grabbed her arms. "I am a Blackwood." "You're a criminal," Alexander said coldly. As Pierce and Victoria were dragged off stage, shouting obscenities, the room erupted into chatter and flashes of camera bulbs. But Alexander didn't care about the press. He turned to Sarah. She was standing by the wheelchair, stroking Martha's hair, tears streaming down her face. She looked exhausted, her uniform dirty, her hair a mess. She was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Alexander walked over to her. He didn't say a word. He just pulled her into a hug so tight it knocked the wind out of her. He buried his face in her neck. "I'm sorry," he whispered into her skin. "I'm so sorry. I should have trusted you." Sarah clung to him, sobbing. "I didn't steal the drive, I swear." I know. Alexander pulled back, framing her face in his hands. "You saved her. You saved me." He looked down at Martha. "Grandma?" Martha looked up. She was fading again, the energy spent, but she raised her hand one last time. She pointed at Alexander, then at Sarah. She brought her 2 index fingers together. Then she closed her eyes, a peaceful smile on her face. "Is she?" Alexander panicked. Sarah checked her pulse. "She's sleeping. Natural sleep. She's safe now." 3 days later, the scandal was the biggest story in financial history. Victoria and Pierce were denied bail. The footage of the Waitress warrior, as the internet dubbed her, had gone viral with 50 million views. Sarah was packing her bag in her Queen's apartment. She wasn't sure what happened next. She hadn't heard from Alexander since the police took statements at the hotel. He had been at the hospital with Martha non-stop. There was a knock on the door. Sarah opened it. It was Alexander. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing jeans and a sweater. He looked 10 years younger. "Can I come in?" It's not a palace," Sarah said, stepping aside. Alexander walked in, looking around the small, cramped living room. He saw Toby sitting on the couch, looking nervous. Alexander walked right up to Toby. He knelt down. He raised his hands. His movements were slow, practiced. "Hello. My name is Alex." Toby's jaw dropped. Sarah gasped. "I want to help your sister," Alexander signed. "And you," Toby grinned and signed back. "You are the rich guy." Alexander laughed. "Yes, I am the rich guy." He stood up and turned to Sarah. He pulled an envelope from his pocket. "What is this?" Sarah asked. "Toby's surgery is scheduled for Monday. Dr. Aris, the best specialist in the country, is flying in. Alexander, I can't pay you back for that." "You don't have to," Alexander said. "It's part of the benefits package." "Benefits package?" "For the CEO of the Blackwood Foundation," Alexander said. "We're pivoting. Less corporate raiding, more philanthropy. Martha's orders. She wants you to run the charitable arm. Specifically, accessibility initiatives for the deaf community." Sarah stared at him. I don't know how to be a CEO." "I'll teach you," Alexander said. He stepped closer. "And you can teach me how to listen." He took her hand. Martha also had one other demand. "What?" "She wants to know if you'll come to dinner on Sunday. She says she wants a burger, and she insists you sit next to me." Sarah smiled, a radiant, genuine smile that lit up the dimly lit apartment. "Tell her I'll bring the ketchup." Alexander didn't let go of her hand. "I think," he said softly, "we're going to be just fine." 6 months later, the skyline of Manhattan looked the same, shimmering in the autumn sun. But the world inside the Blackwood Empire had changed entirely. The Iceman had melted. Wall Street analysts were baffled. They had predicted that Blackwood & Co. would crumble after the scandal. Instead, profits were up 20%. It turned out that treating employees with respect and investing in ethical innovation was actually good for business. Who knew? But the real jewel in the crown wasn't the stock price. It was the building standing on West 42nd Street, previously a hollow shell of a failed bank, now gleaming with fresh glass and purpose. The sign above the door read, "The Martha Blackwood Center for Communication and Accessibility." Inside the grand atrium, hundreds of people were gathered. There were no stuffy board members or judgmental socialites today. The crowd was a vibrant mix of the deaf community, families, medical professionals, and scholarship recipients. Sarah stood at the podium. She wore a tailored suit, but she still wore the simple silver necklace Toby had made for her years ago. She looked out at the crowd, her hands resting on the lectern. She didn't speak into the microphone immediately. Instead, she raised her hands. "Welcome home," she signed. The room erupted, not in applause, but in the deaf applause of hundreds of hands waving in the air, a silent, beautiful shimmering of appreciation. Sarah smiled, her voice catching in her throat as she spoke into the mic for the hearing attendees. For too long, silence was treated as a deficit in this city. But silence isn't empty. It's full of answers if you're willing to look. She looked down at the front row. Toby was there, looking sharp in a mini tuxedo, chatting animatedly in sign language with a new friend he'd made at the center. His surgery had been a success, but more importantly, he had found a community. He wasn't the deaf kid anymore. He was just Toby. Next to him sat Martha Blackwood. She looked 20 years younger. Her white hair was styled in a chic bob, and she wore a leather jacket that was far cooler than anything Victoria had ever owned. Speaking of Victoria and Pierce, news from the upstate penitentiary suggested that Victoria was currently working in the laundry duty rotation, a poetic justice that Martha found endlessly amusing. And then there was Alexander. He stood by the side of the stage, watching Sarah with a look of undisguised awe. He wasn't checking his phone. He wasn't worrying about the next merger. He was simply present. When Sarah finished her speech, Alexander walked up to the stage. He took the microphone, but then he set it down. He faced the crowd, took a deep breath, and looked at Martha. "Grandmother," he signed. His movements were a bit stiff, but clear. "Thank you for teaching me to see." Then he turned to Sarah. The room went still. "Sarah," he signed, spelling her name carefully. "You gave me my family back." He reached into his pocket. He didn't pull out a ring. Not yet, though everyone knew it was coming. He pulled out a crumpled, stained piece of paper. It was the order ticket from l'Orangerie from that first night. "I kept this," Alexander said aloud, his voice thick with emotion. "Cheeseburger, fries, heavy salt. It was the most expensive meal of my life because it cost me my pride. But it bought me a future." He walked over to Sarah and took her hands. "I love you," he said, loud enough for the back row to hear. Then he signed it, placing his hand over his heart. "I love you." Sarah didn't need words. She pulled him into a kiss that drew a roar of approval from the crowd, both voiced and silent. Martha rolled her wheelchair forward to the ribbon-cutting station. She held the giant scissors. She looked at the happy couple, then at the thriving center, and finally at the camera crew documenting the event. She winked at the lens and signed one final message to the world. "Listen with your heart. The ears can be fooled, but the heart always hears the truth." She cut the ribbon. The silk fell away. And in the heart of New York City, a new conversation had finally begun. And that is the incredible story of how a single act of kindness from a waitress toppled $1 billion conspiracy. It proves that sometimes the most powerful voice in the room isn't the one shouting. It's the one that takes the time to understand. Alexander and Sarah proved that communication is about connection, not just words. And Martha? Well, she's still running the show, one cheeseburger at a time. If this story touched your heart, please give this video a like. It really helps us share these stories with more people. And if you want more dramatic, real-life inspired stories full of twists, justice, and romance, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. What would you have done if you were in Sarah's shoes? Would you have risked your job to sign to Martha? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and remember, never underestimate the power of being understood.